A chilling stillness settled over Nuremberg prison. On the night of October 15th, 1946, with the scheduled executions just 2 hours away, a guard peered into the cell of prisoner number 1. There, on a narrow bed, Hermann Göring lay unnaturally still. Beside him was a handwritten note, in his mouth the remnants of a crushed potassium cyanide capsule. The Reichsmarshal, once the second most powerful man in the Third Reich, had deceived them all. He had chosen his own end, refusing to grant his enemies the satisfaction of seeing him hang like a common criminal. The decorated war pilot, who became an architect of the Nazi terror machine, the commander of the Luftwaffe, who lived in palaces overflowing with stolen art, had staged one last act of defiance. His final hours spoke volumes about the staggering arrogance of a regime that had believed itself superior and invincible. But as the world absorbed the news, a troubling question began to form. For 11 months, Göring had been under constant, meticulous surveillance. How, then, did he acquire the poison that allowed him to frustrate international justice at the final moment? The Bavarian Alps stood like sentinels over Rosenheim, their jagged peaks a reflection of the rigid values that would shape the child born below. On the 12th of January, 1893, Hermann Wilhelm Göring entered the world. He was the descendant of a traditional Prussian family where honor and service to the state were not just values, but sacred duties. His father's past as a colonial official in the empire's restive African territories filled their home with a palpable sense of Germanic pride and a deep-seated reverence for authority. From his earliest days, the young Göring dreamed not of toys, but of uniforms, parades, and the steel hulls of battleships, inheriting a conviction that Germany was destined to command. When the Great War erupted, Göring was already a determined officer in the 112th Infantry Regiment, but the mud and stagnation of the trenches failed to satisfy his towering ambition. A bout of ill health pulled him from the front lines, yet it was this twist of fate that directed his gaze upward. In 1915, he transferred to the fledgling Army Air Service, and in the open, perilous skies, he discovered his true calling. As a fighter pilot, Göring became a force of nature, renowned for his chilling audacity and lethal precision, a perfect vessel for both heroism and ego. He carved his name into the annals of aerial combat, amassing 22 confirmed victories and becoming a celebrated symbol of the German Empire's new warrior elite. Berlin's military records charted his meteoric rise. He was awarded the Iron Cross First Class, and in 1918, the highest Prussian honor for valor. After the death of the legendary Red Baron Manfred von Richthofen, it was Göring who was chosen to command Jagdgeschwader 1. The position was the pinnacle of prestige, but it carried an immense burden, leading the nation's finest pilots as the war effort began to crumble. He held the squadron's morale together until the very end. But the armistice of 1918 shattered more than just the German army. It broke the spirit of a generation. The humiliating terms of the Versailles Treaty plunged millions into despair. For Göring and countless veterans like him, the defeat was not a failure on the battlefield, but a treacherous stab in the back. This burning sense of betrayal would become the fuel for his rage. In the chaotic streets of post-war Munich, that rage found a voice. In 1922, listening to the fiery rhetoric of an agitator named Adolf Hitler, Göring heard an echo of his own soul, a familiar symphony of discipline, fervent nationalism, and a thirst for revenge. Captivated by Hitler's promise to restore German glory, Göring joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The next year, he was a key figure in the Beer Hall Putsch, a brazen attempt to seize power in Bavaria. But the coup collapsed into a disastrous firefight. Göring was grievously wounded in the groin, an injury that forced him into exile. It was there, in a haze of excruciating pain, that he first turned to morphine. The drug offered relief, but it also forged a dependency that would shadow him for the rest of his life, warping his personality with volatile swings of euphoria, arrogance, and instability. Upon his return to Germany, he found a newly freed Adolf Hitler rebuilding his movement. The Nazi leader saw in the decorated war hero far more than a mere follower. He saw a powerful symbol. Göring was the perfect embodiment of lost glory, a figure of immense prestige who could lend the party an air of legitimacy. The alliance was sealed. The celebrated pilot and the incendiary orator, bound by shared resentment and limitless ambition, forged a partnership that would drag the world into a new and terrifying darkness. By the dawn of 1933, their ascent to absolute power was at hand. In the streets of a wounded Berlin, the air itself seemed to vibrate with a new and terrible energy. The year was 1933, and as Adolf Hitler seized the reins of Germany, Hermann Göring's unwavering loyalty was about to be repaid in the currency of absolute power. Official documents soon bore witness to his meteoric ascent. Within months, he was Prime Minister of Prussia, Reich Commissioner for Aviation, and Minister of the Interior, an accumulation of authority unmatched by any other figure in the Führer's inner circle. From this nexus of offices, Göring became the vital link between political ambition and the state's machinery of repression. He commanded the Prussian police and its newly forged secret arm, the Gestapo, transforming Germany's largest state into a laboratory for the totalitarian regime. It was here, in the corridors of Prussian bureaucracy, that the blueprint for a nation under surveillance was first drawn. By 1935, the pretense of legality was cast aside. The Luftwaffe, secretly rebuilt for years under Göring's meticulous supervision, was unveiled to a stunned world in open defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. This was the rebirth of German military pride, and Göring, as its commander-in-chief, reveled in the prestige. He understood that whoever controlled the skies held the key to the coming war. But his dominion was not confined to the air. In 1936, Hitler placed him at the head of the four-year plan, an ambitious program to ready the German economy for total conflict. Göring was now the undisputed master of the Reich's industry, presiding over every mine, factory, and trade route. His signature authorized decrees that stripped Jewish citizens of their businesses and conscripted millions into industrial servitude, all while he amassed a personal empire of stolen art and opulent estates. After the stunning victory over France, Hitler rewarded his most loyal paladin with an unprecedented honor on July 19, 1940. He created for Göring the singular rank of Reichsmarshal, placing him above every general and field marshal in the armed forces. This gesture was formalized by Hitler's own declaration on September 1, 1939, naming Göring his successor, the man destined to carry the torch of the Reich should the Führer fall. Yet, with the ultimate authority came the ultimate crime. On July 31, 1941, Göring signed the directive that set in motion the gears of genocide. The order delegated to Reinhard Heydrich the task of organizing a final solution to the Jewish question across German-occupied Europe. That single piece of paper, preserved in the archives of the Holocaust, forever bound the Reichsmarshal to the systematic murder of 6 million people. Hero of the war, heir to the Führer, and architect of atrocity, the man seemed to be everything at once. But behind the glittering facade, the seeds of his own ruin were already beginning to sprout. The zenith of power is often a moment of profound fragility. For Hermann Göring, that moment proved as fleeting as it was absolute. The Battle of Britain, fought high in the skies of an island he had vowed to crush, laid bare the brutal limitations of his vaunted Luftwaffe. The great promises made to Hitler dissolved against the iron will of the British. His relentless bombings, the Blitz, failed to shatter civilian morale or neutralize the Royal Air Force. Instead, Spitfires and Hurricanes, guided by the revolutionary eye of Robert Watson Watt's radar systems, tore through German formations. As observers in Hitler's inner circle would later record, Göring had promised to destroy England and protect the Reich. In the skies over London, it became clear he would fail at both. In 1941, the invasion of the Soviet Union only deepened the disaster. Göring had assured the Führer that air power alone could subdue any foe, but the Eastern Front was an implacable, sprawling reality. The sheer vastness of the territory, the unforgiving climate, and a resurgent Soviet Air Force bled his capabilities dry. Experienced pilots and irreplaceable aircraft were lost at an alarming rate, and the Luftwaffe began to fracture under the weight of an unwinnable war. As defeats mounted, Göring retreated from the front lines and deeper into a world of fantasy at Hall, his lavish estate. Surrounded by carpets, sculptures, and paintings plundered from Europe's great museums and Jewish collections, he sought refuge in opulence. Post-war testimony describes a man physically ruined, dependent on morphine, and utterly detached from the military catastrophe engulfing the Reich he helped build. By April of 1945, with Berlin besieged by the Red Army, Göring made the final error that would seal his fate. On the 23rd, he sent a telegram from Berchtesgaden to the Führer's bunker, asking for authorization to assume leadership. Hitler's response was immediate and volcanic. He saw not a logistical inquiry, but the ultimate betrayal. Within hours, the Reichsmarshal was stripped of all titles, expelled from the party, and placed under arrest by the Führer's direct command. Days later, Hitler was dead, and Germany surrendered. Göring, once the second most powerful man of the Third Reich, became a prisoner of American forces, left to face the ruins of a world he had made. In the quiet aftermath of total war, the time for reckoning had arrived. The architects of Germany's ruin were now captives, their empire reduced to ash and rubble. On May 9, 1945, American units in Bavaria took Hermann Göring into custody. Yet, this was no desperate fugitive. He presented himself with a chilling arrogance, announcing his identity as if expecting a formal reception. Reichsmarshal of the German Reich, the second man in the fallen empire. During the months spent in captivity, a startling transformation took place. Forced under medical supervision to detoxify from a heavy morphine addiction, Göring shed the physical and mental decay of his final years. The bloated, sedated figure receded, and the sharp, cunning strategist he had once been began to re-emerge from the haze. By November 20th, 1945, he was ready. Inside Nuremberg's Palace of Justice, the International Military Tribunal convened the first great trial for war crimes in history. While 24 Nazi leaders faced their accusers, all eyes were drawn to the man who now commanded the defendant's dock. Official transcripts reveal how Göring asserted himself as the unofficial leader of the accused, his old charisma turning the dock into a final, defiant stage. During interrogations, he was intelligent and challenging, refusing to offer any hint of repentance. International journalists from the New York Times and the BBC watched captivated as he engaged in verbal duels with prosecutors. "I do not regret anything," he declared, his words preserved in the Nuremberg archives. "I simply lost the war." When confronted with harrowing evidence from concentration camps and mass executions, he insisted he had only followed orders. But the documents told a different story. Letter after letter, decree after decree, all bore his unmistakable signature. The order from July 31st, 1941, authorizing the final solution, the memorandums confiscating Jewish property, the directives for the Luftwaffe to bomb civilians. Finally, in October of 1946, after months of devastating testimony, the court delivered its verdict. Hermann Göring was found guilty on all 4 counts: conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The sentence was death by hanging. In the cold corridors of Nuremberg prison, the final act was about to begin. On the 15th of October, 1946, Hermann Göring learned he had lost his last battle, not in the skies over Europe, but in a quiet, formal rejection from the Allies. His appeal to die a soldier's death before a firing squad was denied. The once mighty Reichsmarshal would be treated as a common felon, his claimed dignity stripped away as he was led to the gallows. For 11 long months he had lived as a specimen under glass. The lights in his cell burned day and night, and guards performed meticulous searches of his person and his few belongings with unyielding rigor. In that same wing, other architects of the Nazi regime, men like Ribbentrop, Keitel, and Rosenberg, waited for the same dawn and the same fate. The security protocol was meant to be unbreakable, but as the night deepened, a fatal flaw in the system was revealed. Around 11:15, a guard on his rounds noticed something amiss in cell number 5. The prisoner was unnervingly still. He called out, but received no answer. Upon opening the door, he found Göring lying on his cot dressed in his prison uniform, his face strangely serene. He was dead. Beside the body lay a small handwritten note, a final piece of theater written with his signature arrogance. Between his teeth were the telltale fragments of a glass cyanide capsule. He declared that he had chosen to take his own poison, refusing to be executed by his enemies. The news erupted into a scandal that would echo for years, a last ghostly trick from a man who had cheated the hangman. In the cold silence of the prison, a single act of defiance sent shockwaves across the globe. The news spread in a matter of hours, igniting a storm of disbelief and furious speculation. How could a prisoner, watched day and night under the unblinking eyes of the Allies, have concealed a cyanide capsule for nearly a year? Theories multiplied like shadows in the corridors. Some whispered that Hermann Göring had carried the poison since his capture, secreted in a simple cotton tube or sewn into the very fabric of his uniform. Others argued it was hidden in a hollowed-out tooth, a grim dental modification made for this exact purpose. Decades later, a former American soldier named Herbert Lee Stivers would claim he delivered the vial, disguised within the pages of a dictionary, a final, secret correspondence. His confession, however, was never officially confirmed. The final report from the American military authorities offered no clarity, concluding only that the source of the poison remained undetermined. The mystery, much like Göring's own life, was sealed in a shroud of contradiction, arrogance, and deep shadow. While doctors examined the former Reichsmarshal's body on the 16th of October, 1946, the machinery of retribution ground on with chilling precision. In another wing of the prison, the executions began. One by one, the remaining 11 condemned men were marched to the gallows. There was Joachim von Ribbentrop, the Reich's diplomat, Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the High Command, and Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the heir to Himmler's apparatus of terror. They were followed by the ideologue Alfred Rosenberg, the butcher of Poland, Hans Frank, Wilhelm Frick, Julius Streicher, Fritz Sauckel, Alfred Jodl, and Arthur Seyss-Inquart. By 2:45 in the morning, the last of them had been hanged. Göring had escaped the rope, but he would not escape the judgment of history. His body was photographed as undeniable proof of death before being consigned to the flames of a crematorium. The ashes were then scattered into a river in Bavaria, a deliberate and final act to ensure no tomb would ever become a pilgrimage site for those who might admire his dark legacy. In the end, the man who soared between glory and ruin sealed his own fate with the same poison that symbolized the fall of an empire built on destruction. In the stark light of the courtroom, the very nature of evil was on trial, personified by the man in the dock. Unlike the ideological fanaticism of Himmler or the methodical bureaucracy of Eichmann, Hermann Göring represented something else entirely. He was the supreme opportunist, a man who bartered his war decorations for limitless power, transforming his high office into a personal empire of stolen art and obscene privilege. The documents presented at Nuremberg painted a damning portrait. Here was a man who signed orders condemning millions to death without hesitation, who orchestrated the systematic looting of entire nations, and who built an apparatus of terror that shattered lives across a continent. Yet when confronted with the evidence of his actions, he simply met the accusations with a chilling indifference. To prosecute men like Göring, the world needed a new language of justice. The legal precedents established at Nuremberg, international jurisprudence on crimes against humanity, the responsibility of commanders, and the inadmissibility of pleading superior orders were forged in the necessity of holding him accountable. As one British correspondent wrote, he embodied the gangsterism at the heart of the Nazi regime, a thief in a marshal's uniform, a murderer draped in military honors. The story of Hermann Göring is more than the biography of a war criminal. It is a timeless study of how power corrupts. It reveals how ambition, when divorced from any moral compass, can lead a celebrated war hero to become an architect of history's greatest genocide. He possessed intelligence, charisma, and courage proven in combat, but he placed these talents in the service of a state that industrialized murder and sought to exterminate entire peoples. Even in his final moments, he refused to see the monster he had become. His suicide was not an act of remorse, but a last gesture of control, a final defiant refusal to submit to the justice of the nations he had tried to destroy. The records, the photographs, the documents bearing his signature, all remain. Hermann Göring may have escaped the gallows, but he could not escape the verdict of history, his name forever bound to the most depraved crimes of the 20th century.